I've seen as general guidance, but I think like it sort of depends on the space and the constraints and the
Mm,
machine, and so it's going to be very specific to the locations. I think certainly there are standards and guidelines, and states are trying to figure out how to incorporate that into everything that they're doing and managing right now. And I know that there's been regular calls with some of the federal officials and state and local election officials in terms of adopting some of those best practices and trying to figure out what that's going to look like. But honestly, that's like when you see the 7 hour lines in, say, Georgia, like what we saw on Friday during early voting, or we saw, DC with, I think I saw someone waited 7 hours in DC to vote. There's a relationship for sure there with the COVID changes and just the distancing and how the machines have to be, accommodated and wiped down each time and all that. But also, I think it demonstrates the resource allocation issue with enough sites, enough equipment, enough of everything that needs to really happen to make the election successful, especially on the in-person voting side of things. And I think the final thing I'll say, I mean, Amelia makes a great point. I mean, elections are very much about mitigating risk. And when we changed our model in Colorado, it was very much about that. We specifically looked at the significant vulnerabilities in the in-person voting process, whether it be resource allocation, poll worker training problems, location, physical security. No one ever talks about the physical security that is
mm,
problematic at voting locations across the country, whether that be a natural disaster, law enforcement issue, a crime happening, which also happens. There's been cars run into polling places before, bomb threats, all those things happen all the time. And election officials have to mitigate the risk associated with that. And in a lot of ways, mailing a ballot to everyone, like what Vicky did in Kansas, what Amelia does in Utah, what I certainly did in Denver, and what a lot of 6 states now are currently doing, mitigates a lot of risk associated with the in-person voting process. And so we have to make sure all of it works in conjunction. And if it's not working and there are big lines or that kind of thing, we need to figure out why, troubleshoot it, and solve for the November election.